So let's talk about silence. Um, it's something that I, being very academically minded, took for granted. And what I want to share today is that it's actually a very fatal mistake to not value silence. When I was in my late teens, I would consume knowledge to no end. I used to be very proud that in my early 20s I had accumulated and had read over 400 non-fiction books. Some of those technical, some of those philosophical, some of those research related. And I was very clear that the way forward was to obtain a great or vast amount of knowledge, to become the one who knows. If someone had a question and I didn't have an answer, I would feel utterly miserable, and then I would immediately leave where I was and go find a way to study it deeply. So I ended up studying lots of neuroscience textbooks, philosophy, anthropology, mathematics, mostly mathematics for statistical learning. So statistics, probability, linear algebra, and anything I didn't know. I didn't know my partner's language at the time, so I began learning Mandarin, Chinese. I felt I needed to dive deep. And then once I knew, I felt, okay, I now have some value. But then, of course, I'd go out into the world, and once again, I'd be among someone who knew something that I did not. And this sort of shame would rise in me. And I would wonder, why don't I know that? Why have, and then I'd switch my studies into that subject. And it wasn't until the last few years that I really started to shift my focus because I believe it's Ramakrishna who said there are really two types of people who are going to make it as seekers. One type is that they have not accumulated a lot of knowledge, and so there's not a lot of blockage in their way, and so they're able to go through the path in a way that is not as difficult. Now, this is generalization, but it's just useful. And the second type of seeker is the seeker who accumulates a vast amount of knowledge and finds out that it is worth absolutely nothing, because they ultimately find out that no matter how much they consume, it's never enough. It is a sort of consumption pattern, just in the same way people consume clothes. I consume books that way. And what I found is actually I was relying on those subjects to give me the underlying reality that I could explain to myself as this is the reality, this is actually what's happening, and explain to others. I wanted to be able to say, well, this is a way in anthropology, this is a way these cultural practices work. This is why they exist, this is what this culture has, this is what this culture has. And I had this store of knowledge, and then I would go and live in China and find out all that was contradicted. And then I'd go and live in Britain and find out that that was also contradicted. And then I would switch, and okay, that knowledge was not good. I'll switch to psychology, more of neurobiology, William James, Robert Sapolsky, and studying Joseph Ledoux, fear and affective neuroscience, and all of these different things to be able to give more particular understandings of the world, and to also gain status in knowing. And the jobs valued me greatly because of this extensive knowledge. But it's only because I was helping them pretend that the world was knowable. Like, I believe when people experienced my knowledge, my know, my identity of I know, they experienced that the world was actually simple and approachable. And the reason why this happened is because of this, this, and this, instead of the reality of the situation, which is that there are so many causes and conditions that brought about this very moment that I can't even begin to tear them apart. And all research around this is extremely limited. And we can come to know more and more and more, but the gap between the known and the unknown is frighteningly vast. And there's another point. Even if we could know all of the unknowns, we would still suffer. And I can tell you this from my experience. My partner, we spent so much time understanding the mind from a technical perspective, from the neuronal perspective, from physiological perspective, from a statistical perspective, from a narrative perspective, from method CBT, DBT, psychotherapy, all these different things. And in reality, when we came into conflict with each other, knowledge of them was simply not enough. And in fact, it made it all the more frustrating that we claim that we know, and yet we are still doing exactly what we shouldn't be. And so I went through a lot of pain to see that knowledge is meaningless. There are awakened people, or let's call it people of higher consciousness, that understand, let's say, the reality of how things actually are, and are able to see the cycle of suffering from pleasure to pain, from pleasure to pain, back and forth, and to be able to become aware of who they actually are. They see the whole trip. Some of the people who understood their mind understood it and couldn't read a single word on a paper, or maybe a few, but illiterate. And so knowledge doesn't seem to give you anything extra as I thought it might. Now, for some people, it might be helpful. Dogen, a person who brought Zen to Japan, said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said something like, to think you can just accumulate knowledge and that's going to get you somewhere, you're lost. You should put the books away and stop immediately. Just sit. And he was saying, really, sit in silence. So, what is all this silence about? Why is this better than accumulating knowledge? So, when we observe, so you can sit here and just begin to focus on the breath. Allow yourself to be aware of any thoughts or feelings that come up. Try not to identify with them. So imagine you do this for a very long time, or for a very short time for some people. but let's imagine a long time. You will begin to gain a knowledge that doesn't require any description in the form of words. You can observe your mind and your relation, so you can simply observe and bring something into observe. You can say, okay, I'm having a conflict with my partner and I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling negative. Then you can move from I'm feeling negative to understanding that you actually are not feeling negative, because you're not negative. You are aware of negativity. And that sort of knowing requires you to write down nothing. And it gives you this ability to transform the mind through deeply watching it. So the trickery of the mind, which is the idea that you're a self, that you're a male or female or black or white, or you see yourself as a father, and attached to all these identities and constructions of self, and then every time someone attacks that, you feel harmed directly. So you suffer from that. But when you see that the mind is really deluding you, or you are deluded by the mind, in thinking that this is actually real, this whole idea of a self, then you can operate from a very different dimension. And that's hard to describe what that dimension is. We say it's awareness, but remember that any words that I'm using to describe it is only pointing. You actually have to directly experience it yourself. So it is sitting in that silence and observing yourself as the universe. You can begin to see how it's all pulled together, and you can begin to see how this careful con was kind of pulled on you, of believing that you are the person who's hurt, you are the person who is the father, and you are the person with all the status, and you are the person who suffers, and that there are other people out there who are doing better than you or worse than you. All those are consequences of identifying with the mind. And silence allows you to see that. So even though I described it to you, you could go, oh, okay, I get it. You don't get it. You don't really get it, like deep down get it, because you haven't seen it. You haven't observed it from the place of awareness. And you can imagine that awareness is this place that you can go to at any time. Just close your eyes, breathe in, and as a thought comes, notice the thought. And as soon as you've noticed the thought, that was awareness. So who is watching the thoughts? Ramana Maharshi was asked and subsequently developed the self-inquiry around, who am I? And if you look, who is the meditator? So instead of just looking at the content of your consciousness, look at who is aware of that and what does that mean? And sit in silence with that. Really sit there. Don't try to intellectualize it, because that may give you some temporary solace, but ultimately you will go back to the cycle of suffering. So value silence, and it's not just an Eastern or neither is it a Western thing. It is just several traditions. You have the Christian contemplative tradition, Saint John of the Cross, the Dark Night of the Soul. You have Teresa of Avila, who wrote her own biography, autobiography, but also the is it the Seven Mansions? But she basically wrote how she, in her contemplation, was able to see how to become close to God, and it was a very contemplative approach. And you have Meister Eckhart, you have Jesus Christ, you have lots of Japanese Zen masters and Chan masters in China. You have the Tao. You have Confucianism. You have Hinduism, and obviously there's lots of sects there. But ultimately, they seem to all agree that contemplation can help you on the road to awakening. That we must look at ourselves clearly, and that clearly is not defined in intellectual terms. So that was really my spill, and so my experience of silence is, the way I practice this is, when you're with someone, try to be silence. In some ways, just shut up. Really, just be all the way there. Don't, if a thought arises, let it pass. If you have a response and it's so good and oh, it's going to be so great for you to tell this person this, just let it pass. And be the silence, the manifestation of silence. Papaji talked about this. Just sit there and shut up. The cloud of the unknowing talks about the cloud of forgetting, between the cloud of forgetting and the cloud of unknowing. And this silence. And it's no wonder that it's in these silent states that states like samadhi can happen. Incredibly blissful states. So I ask you to try this out, to really try to practice being silent. Not always having a response, not quick firing away, not needlessly saying words that aren't required, allowing there to be space in your life by being silent. So, thank you.